8 senators voted no. Senator Mike Lee, a Republican from Utah, was one of them, and he joins us now. Senator Lee, your response to Senator Corker?
Well, what we did in passing this bill was preserve the vast, overwhelming majority of a totally dysfunctional system, a system that has gotten a $16 trillion in debt and $1 trillion in additional debt every single year with our deficit.
And so you think we're not better off having passed it?
I think we're not better off. I mean, everything about this bill was a failure. What Congress did, how Congress did it, and what Congress didn't do. And you need look no further than the fact that we were given a total of 6 minutes to read this bill before we had to vote on it. Not one single senator who voted for it had read it, and I find that unacceptable.
How do you change that?
Well, first of all, you insist that bills go through the regular order. You insist that we be given an opportunity to read legislation before we're asked to cast a vote on it, whether we're going to be the deciding vote or not. We need to have the opportunity to read it. This was a campaign pledge that I made to my constituents before I was elected, that my default vote on anything will be no. If they don't give me time to read a bill, if there's not a reasonable amount of time for me to review it, I will vote no every time, and this is why. We see what happens when people vote for things that they haven't read. There are always bad things in it.
You know, it's interesting that you point that part of it out. We all, I think, get caught up in getting to the end result, which we knew was against this deadline and this concern about going over the fiscal cliff. And this is what we got from the process. You write about this in an editorial in the Washington Times today, where you talk about a dysfunctional system in Congress, a failed status quo, as you call it. And some of our viewers probably agree with you on that. But the bigger question about how you change that, not only having enough time to read a bill, but change the larger status quo, is a tough one. Where do you even start as you enter into a new Congress? I know, sir, you're part of your same term now, but how do you even approach that?
Jenna, you're right that it's difficult, but the first step toward changing that is to vote no. Because the more times you vote yes for something like this, the more you send the signal to leaders in the Senate that it's okay to follow this kind of process. If we have more people who are willing to stand up and vote no when they try to jam a bill like this down our throats without the opportunity to read it, then we make it much less likely in the future that they'll do this to us if we just vote no. But secondly, we've got to continue to encourage our leaders to actually put a bill on the floor, to encourage the negotiation to move forward within the four corners of the Senate chamber rather than in some backroom deal that never sees the light of day.
So the majority of lawmakers voted yes on this bill. Do you think it's the fault, for lack of a better term, of the American people for putting the wrong people in office? The people that are going to vote yes on a bill like this rather than voting no. Is it our fault?
I wouldn't say that it's the fault of the American people. I'm never going to blame them for mistakes made by a handful of people here. But I do think that...
So who's accountable? Is it the lawmakers themselves?
I think the lawmakers themselves need to stand accountable to the voters that put them there and the voters to whom they will have to answer in the next few years to say, look, why did you do this? And now that this is becoming more of a problem, I think that there will be more accountability, and you'll see more members of both houses of Congress in both political parties voting no when faced with something like this.
You're a new member to Congress. A couple of years ago, you were a regular guy, if you will, like the rest of us, you know, voting to put people in office. We know the president has another 4 years. We're getting some new members of Congress, some new members as well to the Senate. How are you, in the next several years, going to try to change the process in Congress? Where do you start, Senator, to make things different and better?
Well, I'm going to start by encouraging the leadership in the Senate to put bills on the floor, not minutes or seconds before a deadline, but weeks or months before the deadline. And sure, we don't agree on everything. Sure, we don't have a deal in advance, but that's what the Senate floor is for. That's what it's supposed to be there for, so that we can debate and discuss and amend. A legislative proposal might not start out in a state of perfection, and it might not achieve perfection before it's voted on, but at least it can be debated and discussed in the open and amended in the open, and then the American people know what they're getting by the time their elected representatives vote on it.
Why do you feel like this deal had to be done behind closed doors, in such a dark space, as you mentioned, not out in the open?
Well, it doesn't have to be done that way, and it shouldn't be done that way, Jenna, and it wouldn't be done that way if they didn't know that they could get away with it. So I do encourage all people out there who are concerned about this to contact their members of Congress and to tell them that they expect more, and that good enough for Washington simply isn't good enough anymore. We've got to start demanding better. We've got to start demanding a more full process, one that represents the people's interests.
Well, it brings us back to that other question about the power residing in the people. The people have the power to vote. So we'll see what the next few years bring us as we again go into this 113th Congress. Senator, it's nice to have you as always. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Jenna.